What would you do if standing up for what's right cost you everything? Meet Victoria Jones, a teacher who risked it all to protect a student and ended up changing the world. But when fate intervenes 6 hours later, her life takes an unexpected turn. The fluorescent lights of Ridgewood High buzzed faintly above Victoria Jones's head as she leaned over her desk, grading papers. The clock on the wall ticked past 6 o'clock, but she barely noticed. This was her routine, staying late, ensuring every student received thoughtful feedback, even if it meant sacrificing her evenings. Teaching wasn't just a job for Victoria, it was a calling. She had always believed in the power of education to change lives, especially for kids who came from difficult backgrounds. But lately, something had been gnawing at her. It started with Benjamin. He was one of her quieter students, often sitting near the back of the classroom, his shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear. At first, Victoria chalked it up to shyness. But then she began noticing the bruises on his arms, the way he flinched when other students raised their voices. And there was Jason, the loud, entitled boy who seemed to delight in making Benjamin's life miserable. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Jason's father, Richard Langston, was a prominent member of the school board and a man known for wielding his influence like a weapon. Teachers whispered about him in the faculty lounge, warning each other not to cross him. Victoria had tried to address the issue discreetly, pulling Jason aside after class to remind him of the school's anti-bullying policy. But Jason smirked, unfazed, and the next day, Benjamin came to school with a black eye. Victoria couldn't let it go on. She scheduled a meeting with Principal Meyer, hoping he would intervene. Instead, she found herself sitting across from him in his office, listening to excuses. "Victoria, I understand your concerns," Meyer said, his tone placating but firm. "But we have to be careful. Richard Langston is, well, you know how he is. If we accuse his son without concrete evidence, it could blow back on us. On you. So we're just going to ignore it?" Victoria asked, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Benjamin is being hurt, and we're supposed to do nothing?" Meyer sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm sorry, Victoria. Sometimes, picking our battles is the only way to survive in this system." Survive. The word lingered in the air like smoke, choking her resolve. She left the office feeling defeated but not deterred. That night, she drafted a letter to the school board, detailing everything she'd observed. She knew it was risky, but she also knew she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. The PTA meeting 2 days later was packed. Parents filled the rows of chairs, their faces illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. Victoria stood at the front of the room, clutching her notes tightly. Her heart pounded as Richard Langston entered, his presence commanding attention. He took a seat near the center, exuding an air of casual arrogance that made Victoria's stomach churn. When it was her turn to speak, Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady despite the nerves clawing at her chest. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "I wanted to bring something important to your attention, a matter that affects the safety and well-being of our students." She recounted the incidents involving Jason and Benjamin, presenting her observations clearly and calmly. As she spoke, she noticed the reactions around the room. Some parents nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Richard Langston's expression darkened with each passing moment. When she finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Richard stood, his eyes narrowing as he addressed her. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you've made some serious accusations here. Do you have any proof to back them up?" Victoria hesitated. Proof? How could she prove what she saw when Benjamin refused to speak out of fear? Still, she pressed on. "Sometimes the truth doesn't need proof," she replied. "It needs action. And right now, Benjamin needs protection." The room erupted into murmurs. Richard glared at her before turning to the rest of the board. "This kind of insubordination is unacceptable," he declared. "If Ms. Jones can't follow protocol, perhaps she shouldn't be teaching our children." The vote was swift and unanimous. By the end of the meeting, Victoria was handed a termination letter, her name already crossed off the staff roster. As she gathered her belongings from her classroom, tears stung her eyes, not out of self-pity, but out of frustration. Had she done the right thing? Or had she thrown away her career for nothing? Outside, the cool evening air did little to soothe her racing thoughts. She walked home slowly, replaying the events of the day in her mind. Somewhere deep inside, though, a small spark of defiance remained. Even if no one else stood with her, she knew she'd done what was right, for Benjamin, for her principles, and for the hope that maybe, someday, someone would see the value in standing up for what truly mattered. The weight of the day still hung heavy on Victoria's shoulders as she walked through Ridgewood Park, her steps slow and deliberate. The park was one of her favorite places, a quiet refuge where she could think without interruption. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting shadows across the winding paths. She had come here to clear her head, though clarity felt impossibly distant. Her mind kept circling back to the meeting, replaying every word, every glance, every moment that had led to her dismissal. She clenched her fists at her sides, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. What was the point of fighting for justice if it only left you alone and defeated? Yet even as doubt crept in, a stubborn part of her refused to let go of the belief that doing the right thing mattered, even if the world didn't always reward it. Lost in thought, Victoria almost missed the figure slumped on a nearby bench. At first, she assumed he was simply resting, perhaps catching his breath after a jog. But something about the way he sat, his body rigid, his face pale, caught her attention. As she drew closer, she noticed beads of sweat forming on his forehead and the unnatural stillness of his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "Sir?" she called out tentatively. "Are you okay?" When he didn't respond, Victoria quickened her pace. Up close, she saw the grimace of pain etched into his features. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees beside him. "I'm a teacher," she said firmly, trying to mask her own anxiety. "I've been trained in first aid. Let me help you." The man managed a weak nod, his lips trembling as though attempting to speak. Victoria immediately checked for signs of a heart attack. Clammy skin, chest pain, shortness of breath. Everything pointed in that direction. Acting quickly, she loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top of his shirt to ease his breathing. Then, positioning herself beside him, she began performing CPR, counting rhythmically under her breath. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she worked, her arms aching with the effort. Passers-by gathered around, some offering panicked suggestions, others calling for an ambulance. Victoria blocked them out, focusing solely on the task at hand. After what felt like an eternity, the man gasped, his eyes fluttering open. Relief flooded through her as she helped him sit up slightly, ensuring he remained stable until paramedics arrived. By the time the ambulance pulled into the park, the man was conscious but clearly shaken. One of the medics knelt beside him, checking his vitals while another turned to Victoria. "You saved his life," the medic said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Do you mind giving us your contact information? He'll want to thank you personally." Victoria hesitated. The last thing she wanted was recognition or worse, complications. But seeing the gratitude in the man's eyes, she relented, scribbling her name and phone number onto a slip of paper provided by the paramedics. As the ambulance drove away, Victoria stood there for a moment, watching its taillights disappear into the distance. Her earlier turmoil felt momentarily muted, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. For all the anger and despair swirling inside her, she had made a difference today, even if it was just for one person. Walking home, however, reality came crashing back. Each step reminded her of everything she had lost: the job she loved, the students who relied on her, the sense of belonging she'd once taken for granted. She tried to push those thoughts aside, reminding herself that she couldn't dwell on the past. Not now. Not when the future felt so uncertain. When she finally reached her apartment, exhaustion overtook her. She sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling her. It was a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for saving my life today. I owe you more than words can express." Victoria stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to dismiss it, to brush off the encounter as nothing more than a random act of kindness. But another part of her couldn't ignore the flicker of curiosity stirring within her. Who was this man? And why did she feel as though their paths crossing might mean something more? For now, she set the phone aside, too drained to dwell on it further. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own questions. All she could do tonight was rest, and hope that somehow, against all odds, things would begin to make sense again. The hum of the city outside Victoria's apartment window was unusually loud that evening, a stark contrast to the quiet introspection she had fallen into after her encounter in the park. She had spent most of the day tidying up her small living space, rearranging books and clearing out old papers. Anything to distract herself from the gnawing uncertainty about her future. The text message from the man she'd saved lingered in the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside, dismissing it as a fleeting moment of gratitude. As night fell, the noise outside shifted. Engines roared, tires crunched against gravel, and voices carried through the thin walls of her building. Curious, Victoria stepped to the window and pulled back the curtain. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 luxury cars were parked directly in front of her building, sleek, polished machines that seemed out of place in her modest neighborhood. A chauffeur stood by one of them, his posture formal and attentive. Passengers emerged from the vehicles, their tailored suits and confident strides marking them as people accustomed to power and privilege. At the center of it all was the man from the park. He looked different now, more composed, though faint traces of his earlier vulnerability lingered in the slight tightness around his eyes. He glanced up at her window, as if sensing her gaze, and then gestured for the others to wait. Moments later, there was a knock at her door. Victoria hesitated, her heart racing. Who was this man? And why had he come here? She opened the door cautiously, peering out. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice warm but tinged with urgency. "I hope I'm not intruding." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Not at all. Please, come in." He stepped inside, his presence filling the room despite its cramped dimensions. Up close, she noticed the fine lines etched into his face, the silver threading through his dark hair. There was an air of authority about him, but also something softer, a deep sincerity that put her slightly at ease. "I'm Cosmo Harper," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "You saved my life yesterday. I don't think I properly thanked you." "It was nothing," Victoria replied automatically, though the words felt inadequate. Saving someone's life wasn't nothing, no matter how much she tried to downplay it. Cosmo smiled faintly, as if he understood her discomfort. "To you, perhaps, but to me it was everything." He paused, reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "I want to repay you for your courage, your quick thinking, and for giving me a second chance." Before Victoria could protest, he placed a check on her kitchen counter. Her eyes widened as she read the amount. $300,000. What is this?" she stammered, staring at the slip of paper as though it might disappear. "It's a token of my gratitude," Cosmo said simply. "Please take it. You deserve it." Victoria shook her head, backing away instinctively. "No, I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can," Cosmo insisted, his tone gentle but firm. "And you should. You've already given so much, to your students, to strangers like me. Let me do this for you." His words struck a chord deep within her, stirring emotions she hadn't fully processed since losing her job. For months, maybe years, she had poured herself into others, often at the expense of her own well-being. Accepting help, even in the form of gratitude, felt foreign, almost unnatural. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything right now," Cosmo replied. "Just promise me you'll consider it." "And?" he hesitated, glancing toward the window where the cars waited. "There's something else I'd like to discuss with you. Something important. Would you join me for dinner tonight?" Victoria frowned, caught off guard. "Dinner? Why?" Cosmo's smile softened. "Because I believe you're someone who understands the value of making a difference." And because I think we might have more in common than you realize. The vagueness of his statement intrigued her, though she couldn't quite place why. Still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, she found herself nodding. All right, dinner sounds interesting. Good, Cosmo said, visibly relieved. I'll send a car for you at 7. Until then, Ms. Jones, thank you again. With that, he turned and left, leaving Victoria standing in stunned silence. When the sound of the engines faded and the street returned to its usual quiet, she sank onto the couch, the check still resting on the counter. Her mind raced with questions. Who was Cosmo Harper? What did he mean by having something important to discuss? And why did she feel as though this strange twist of fate was only the beginning of something far greater? The weight on her shoulders felt lighter, not gone, but tempered by a flicker of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The restaurant Cosmo had chosen was unlike any place Victoria had ever been. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, its entrance marked by understated elegance rather than ostentation. Inside, soft lighting bathed the room in warm hues, and the hum of conversation mingled with the gentle strains of live piano music. The hostess led her to a secluded table near the back, where Cosmo sat waiting, his posture relaxed but commanding. He rose as she approached, offering a polite smile. Ms. Jones, thank you for joining me. Thank you for inviting me, Victoria replied, taking her seat. She glanced around the room, feeling both out of place and oddly at ease. There was something disarming about Cosmo's demeanor, his calm confidence, his genuine interest in what she had to say. As they ordered their meals, small talk filled the space between them. But it wasn't long before Cosmo steered the conversation toward more meaningful territory. I've done some research on you, he began, folding his hands on the table. Your work at Ridgewood High, your dedication to students who often fall through the cracks. You're remarkable, Ms. Jones. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct praise. I'm just doing my job, or I was anyway. Cosmo nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yes, I read about what happened. Your dismissal from the school. It's unfortunate. Unfortunate. The word felt woefully inadequate to describe the upheaval she'd endured, but Victoria let it slide. It is what it is, she said with a shrug. Sometimes standing up for what's right comes at a cost. And yet, here you are, Cosmo countered, still willing to help others, even when it costs you everything. That kind of courage is rare. Victoria looked down at her glass, avoiding his gaze. Courage? Was that what it was? Or had she simply acted out of instinct, driven by a deep-seated need to protect those who couldn't protect themselves? Before she could respond, Cosmo leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to something more serious. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet with you tonight. As I mentioned earlier, I'm involved in philanthropy, specifically initiatives aimed at improving education. I believe every child deserves access to opportunities that allow them to thrive, regardless of their background. Victoria listened intently, her curiosity piqued. She had always admired people who used their resources to make a difference, though she rarely imagined herself crossing paths with them. I'm launching a new project, Cosmo continued, a nonprofit school designed to prioritize the well-being of children over bureaucratic red tape. A place where teachers like you can truly shine without being constrained by outdated systems. He paused, studying her reaction. And I think you're exactly the person to lead it. For a moment, Victoria forgot how to breathe. Led a school? Her mind raced, grappling with the enormity of what he was proposing. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. That's an incredible opportunity, but why me? Because you understand the challenges these kids face, Cosmo said firmly. You've lived them, and because you have the heart and determination to create something extraordinary. This isn't just about building a school, Ms. Jones. It's about changing lives. His words resonated deeply, stirring something within her that she hadn't realized had been dormant. For so long, she had felt powerless, adrift in the aftermath of losing her job. Now, here was Cosmo offering her not only a lifeline but also a chance to rebuild and change the lives of countless others. But there was still a part of her that hesitated. Could she really step into such a monumental role? What if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough? As if sensing her doubts, Cosmo added softly, "You won't be alone in this. I'll provide the resources, the connections, the support you need. All I ask is that you bring your vision, your passion, and your unwavering commitment to making a difference." Victoria stared at him, her thoughts swirling. It was a lot to take in, an offer that seemed almost too good to be true. Yet there was a sincerity in his eyes, a conviction in his voice that made it impossible to dismiss outright. Before she could respond, Cosmo changed the subject slightly, his tone lighter but still purposeful. "By the way, do you remember Benjamin?" he asked. "The boy you defended at Ridgewood High?" Her stomach tightened at the mention of Benjamin's name. Of course she remembered him. The bruises, the fear, the quiet resilience that had broken her heart. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Why?" "He's my nephew," Cosmo revealed, his gaze steady. "My sister's son." She struggled, financially, emotionally, "and I've tried to be there for him as much as I can. When I heard about what you did for him, risking your career to stand up for him," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It reaffirmed my belief that people like you are exactly what this world needs more of." The revelation hit Victoria like a tidal wave. Benjamin was Cosmo's nephew. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The subtle hints Cosmo had dropped, the connection to Ridgewood High, the personal stake he had in all of this. It wasn't just about philanthropy or education reform. It was deeply personal for him. "I didn't know," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "About Benjamin, I mean, if I had." "You would have done the same thing," Cosmo interrupted gently. "That's who you are, Ms. Jones. And that's why I trust you to lead this project." Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Victoria felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But beneath it, there was something else. A spark of hope, a flicker of excitement. She allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't merely surviving, but thriving. Where she could build something meaningful, something lasting. As the evening wore on, their conversation turned to logistics, details about funding, timelines, potential locations for the school. But throughout it all, one thought remained at the forefront of Victoria's mind. This wasn't just an opportunity to start over. It was a chance to rewrite the narrative, to turn loss into legacy, pain into purpose. And as she left the restaurant later that night, Cosmo's card tucked safely in her pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared to dream. The days that followed her dinner with Cosmo were a whirlwind of activity. Victoria threw herself into the planning process with a fervor she hadn't felt in years. It was as if every ounce of frustration, every moment of doubt and despair, had been channeled into this new purpose. She spent hours researching educational models, sketching out ideas for curriculums, and drafting proposals for programs that prioritized emotional well-being alongside academic growth. Cosmo provided unwavering support, offering not only financial backing but also connections to experts in education reform, child psychology, and community development. Together, they assembled a team of passionate individuals who shared Victoria's vision, a diverse group of educators, counselors, and volunteers determined to create something transformative. Yet, even amidst the excitement, Victoria couldn't ignore the challenges ahead. One of the first hurdles came when they began searching for a location. Many of the buildings they considered were either too expensive or unsuitable for their needs. Just as Victoria started to worry they might have to compromise on their vision, Cosmo made an unexpected suggestion: an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ridgewood. The building was old and neglected, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. But Victoria saw potential where others saw ruin. "This could work," she said, standing in the middle of the empty space during their initial walkthrough. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings as she gestured toward the vast open areas. "We can turn this into classrooms, a library, even a community center. It's perfect." "Perfect?" one of the architects joked, raising an eyebrow. It's going to take a lot of work. That's exactly why it's perfect, Victoria replied with a grin. Because we're going to build it together, from the ground up. And so, the renovation began. What started as a daunting task quickly became a labor of love. Volunteers poured in, parents eager to see better opportunities for their children, former colleagues inspired by Victoria's courage, even students from Ridgewood High who remembered her kindness. They worked tirelessly, painting walls, installing furniture, and transforming the once decrepit space into a vibrant hub of learning and hope. But progress wasn't without its obstacles. Word of the project spread quickly, drawing both admiration and criticism. Some praised Victoria and Cosmo for their bold initiative, while others accused them of overstepping boundaries or meddling in matters beyond their expertise. Among the detractors was Richard Langston, whose disdain for Victoria hadn't faded since her dismissal from Ridgewood High. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered during a chance encounter at a local town hall meeting. "You're just another idealistic fool playing at changing the world." Victoria met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. "Maybe I am," she said quietly, "but at least I'm trying. Can you say the same?" Her words silenced him, though his scowl lingered as he turned away. It was a small victory, but one that reminded Victoria why she had chosen this path: to challenge the status quo, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As the school took shape, Victoria found herself reflecting more deeply on the people who had shaped her journey. She thought about Benjamin, whose quiet strength had inspired her to act. She thought about Cosmo, whose personal connection to the project gave it added meaning. And she thought about herself, the woman she had been before everything fell apart, and the woman she was becoming now. One afternoon, as she supervised the installation of a mural in the main hallway, Cosmo approached her with a folder in hand. "I thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a letter from Benjamin. His handwriting was uneven, the words carefully chosen, as though each one carried great weight. "Dear Ms. Jones, I heard about the school you're building. I know it's because of me, that you lost your job because of me, and I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to do what you did, but you did it anyway. That means more to me than I can say. I hope someday I can be brave like you." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes as she read the note. She folded it gently and tucked it into her pocket, her heart swelling with gratitude and resolve. This was why she had fought so hard, for moments like this, for the chance to make someone feel seen, valued, and capable of greatness. By the time the school was ready for its grand opening, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The once abandoned warehouse now stood as a beacon of possibility, its exterior painted in bright colors and adorned with murals depicting scenes of unity and growth. Inside, classrooms buzzed with energy, filled with books, art supplies, and technology donated by local businesses and philanthropists. On the morning of the inauguration, Victoria stood at the entrance, watching as families streamed in. Some nervous, others hopeful, all eager to see what lay ahead. As she greeted each visitor, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that this was only the beginning. When it was time for her to speak, she stepped onto a small stage set up in the central courtyard. The crowd grew quiet, their eyes fixed on her. For a moment, she hesitated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Then she took a deep breath and began. "When I first started teaching," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her, "I believed that education was about giving students the tools they needed to succeed. And while that's true, I've come to realize it's about so much more than that. It's about creating spaces where kids feel safe, supported, and empowered to dream bigger than they ever thought possible." She paused, scanning the faces before her, young and old, familiar and unfamiliar. This school isn't just a building. It's a promise. A promise that no matter where you come from or what challenges you face, you deserve a chance to thrive. And I believe that together, we can make that promise a reality. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the courtyard and filling the air with a sense of collective hope. As Victoria stepped down from the stage, she spotted Benjamin standing near the back of the crowd, his mother beside him. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small, tentative smile. She walked over to them, her steps light despite the weight of everything she had endured. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, addressing both Benjamin and his mother. "This place wouldn't exist without you." Benjamin shook his head, his voice barely audible. "No, Miss Jones. None of this would exist without you." In that moment, Victoria felt a peace she hadn't known in years, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The road ahead would still hold challenges. She knew that, and she faced them not with fear or uncertainty, but with unshakable faith in the power of resilience, compassion, and community. As the celebration continued around her, Victoria allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, united by a shared vision of a brighter future. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The days following the school's grand opening were a blur of activity, each moment charged with possibility. Victoria moved through the halls with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years, her presence a steady anchor for both students and staff. The classrooms buzzed with energy, the air alive with laughter, curiosity, and the occasional hum of debate. It was everything she had dreamed of, a place where children weren't just taught but truly seen, nurtured, and inspired. Yet, amidst the joy, there were challenges. Some students struggled to adapt to the new environment, their insecurities manifesting in unexpected ways. Others arrived carrying burdens far heavier than their young shoulders should have borne: hunger, neglect, fear. Each case tugged at Victoria's heart, reminding her why this work mattered so deeply. She spent late nights crafting individualized plans for struggling students, collaborating with counselors, and ensuring that no one slipped through the cracks. One afternoon, as she sat in her modest office reviewing lesson plans, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called, glancing up from her desk. Benjamin stepped inside, his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie. He looked older somehow, not physically, but in the way he carried himself, as though the weight of his past was slowly giving way to something stronger. "Hey, Benjamin," Victoria said warmly, gesturing for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" For a moment, he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, taking a deep breath, he spoke. "I wanted to say thank you again. For everything. Not just for standing up for me, but for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Victoria's throat tightened, and she reached across the desk to place a reassuring hand on his arm. "You don't have to thank me, Benjamin. You've earned every bit of this. All I did was remind you of what you already knew, that you're capable of amazing things." He nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. Do you think my mom could come here too? To learn stuff, I mean, she wants to finish her GED, but she doesn't know where to start." Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Of course she can. We have programs for parents and guardians, and we'll make sure she gets all the support she needs. Tell her to stop by any time. I'd love to meet her." Benjamin's face lit up with relief, and he stood quickly, offering a shy but genuine smile before heading out the door. Watching him go, Victoria felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was why she had fought so hard, not just to create opportunities for students like Benjamin, but to uplift entire families, to break cycles of hardship and build bridges toward brighter futures. As weeks turned into months, the school continued to grow. Enrollment numbers surpassed expectations, drawing in families from across the city who had long been underserved by traditional systems. Local businesses began partnering with the school, offering internships and mentorship programs. Even some of Victoria's former colleagues from Ridgewood High joined the team, inspired by her vision and eager to be part of something transformative. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of it all was the relationships she built along the way. Parents became active participants in their children's education, volunteering their time and sharing their skills. Students formed bonds that transcended differences, learning not only from textbooks but also from one another. And Cosmo remained a steadfast ally, attending events, advocating for funding, and occasionally dropping by to check on progress. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the windows, Victoria found herself standing in the courtyard where the inauguration had taken place. The space was quiet now, save for the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. She wrapped her arms around herself, savoring the stillness. "You look like someone who's finally found peace," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Cosmo approaching, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. There was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet admiration that made her smile. "I think I have," she admitted, turning back to gaze at the school. "This place, it's more than I ever imagined it could be. More than I ever imagined I could be." Cosmo stepped beside her, following her gaze. "You've done something extraordinary, Victoria. Something that will change lives for generations to come. Don't underestimate the power of what you've created." "I couldn't have done it alone," she replied softly. "None of this would exist without people like you, or Benjamin, or the volunteers, or the families who trusted us enough to take a chance." "That's the beauty of it," Cosmo said, his tone thoughtful. "It's not about any one person. It's about what happens when we come together, united by a shared belief in something greater than ourselves." They stood in silence for a while, the weight of their accomplishment settling comfortably between them. Finally, Victoria broke the quiet. "What's next for you?" she asked, glancing at him. "Are you going to keep building schools like this one?" Cosmo chuckled lightly. "Maybe someday. For now, though, I think my job here is done. You've got everything under control, and then some." His words brought a mix of gratitude and bittersweetness. While she was immensely thankful for his support, she knew their paths would soon diverge. Still, she felt certain that their connection, forged through shared struggles and triumphs, would endure. As they parted ways that evening, Victoria lingered in the courtyard a little longer, letting the cool night air wash over her. She thought about how far she had come, from the despair of losing her job to the exhilaration of creating something meaningful. Each step of the journey had tested her, shaped her, and ultimately led her here. When she finally returned home, she settled onto her couch with a cup of tea, flipping open her journal. She hadn't written in it much lately, too consumed by the demands of launching the school. But tonight, she felt compelled to put pen to paper, to capture the emotions swirling within her. "Today," she wrote, "I realized that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward even when you are afraid, even when the odds seem impossible. It's about believing in the possibility of change, no matter how daunting the road may be." She paused, reflecting on the faces of the students she had met that day, their laughter, their questions, their boundless potential. Then, with a small smile, she added, "And sometimes, courage leads you exactly where you're meant to be." Closing the journal, Victoria set it aside and leaned back, allowing herself a rare moment of rest. Outside, the city pulsed with life, its rhythm steady and unyielding. Yet within her, there was a newfound calm, a quiet confidence that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Because she had learned, through every twist and turn, that the courage to stand alone often led to the strength to bring others together. And in doing so, she had discovered not only her purpose but also the power of hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that change was always possible. Even in our darkest moments, courage can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Would you have taken the same risks as Victoria? Share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience and transformation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on Embrace the Journey for more inspiring stories.